My name is Mo Aziz, M-O, last name A-Z-I-Z. I represent Levi Harvey. That's the young man sitting to my left who was shot early morning hours on June 11th on widely publicized shooting at the Tabu club, or right outside the Tabu club in a parking lot. Levi was spending some time at the club and had exited to go to his friend's car when he was shot suddenly and unexpectedly, and he'll explain to you his experience. But he received 3 gunshot wounds, and since then our investigation has revealed that the Tabu club had a history of violence, not only inside the club, but on the property surrounding the club, the parking lots and the overflow parking lot, which is owned by a separate real estate company associated with the Papa's group. Levi is going to talk about his injuries, he's talked about his experience, and why he is bringing this lawsuit against the club and the property owners, as well as what the legal team is going to talk about, what we hope to accomplish by filing this case. You know, every weekend we hear of many young lives being changed or taken for mindless, senseless reasons, and until the city, the state does something about it, the only recourse that these young people have is the civil justice system. We do know that the city of Houston did file a lawsuit against the club as well to shut it down, and since then the club, the Tabu club and the adjoining property has been shut down by the city due to exactly what had happened the night of this shooting, and many times before. With that, I'm going to request Levi to share his thoughts.
My name is Levi Harvey, L-E-V-I-H-A-R-V-E-Y. I was leaving Tabu, the club, that night. I remember walking through the parking lot and looking for my friends, and all of a sudden gunfire broke out. The next thing I did was hit the ground. I don't know whether that was to me being hit or me hearing the gunfire, but I do know that gunfire rang out so long that I was able to hit the ground while it was going, get up, and my first reaction was to find a car to jump behind in order to keep from getting hit. And that's exactly what I did. I ran and jumped behind the car. And when I got behind that car, I realized that I had blood all over my arms. During that time, gunfire was still ringing out. And so while it was still going, I ran again. And at that point, I took off across the overflow parking lot, and I noticed that my right leg had went numb. I couldn't see any blood in my leg. Couldn't tell that I had been shot in my leg. But I know I took off running as fast as I could. All the while, gunfire still ringing. In fear for my life, I ran across that parking lot, breath getting shorter and shorter. While I ran across, I had to slow myself down because during the time I was running across the parking lot, I had realized that I had been seriously hit. And although I didn't see it in the front of my body while I was looking down, I could tell that I was losing a lot of blood. And like I said, my breath was getting shorter. I ran up to this 8.5, 9 foot fence. And I knew I had to jump that fence in order to, be clear from the gunfire. And so that's exactly what I did. So winded and out of breath, and obviously losing a lot of blood, I jumped that 8.5, 9 foot fence and landed in the parking lot of another establishment where there were girls waiting in the parking lot, bystanders. Luckily, one of them saw me bleeding, saw how much blood I was losing. At this point, my breath had gotten so short. At that point, I thought I was gonna die. Thought I was gonna lose my life. I didn't know whether I was gonna live or die at that moment. I yelled out to that young lady to call 911. All the time, focusing on my breathing, hoping that I can hold on for the EMTs to show up and to get me to the hospital. Hoping that I can make it there, make it long enough for me to stay alive for, medical help. I ended up sitting down in that parking lot. Those girls waited with me, and I'm so grateful. I waited in that parking lot. The girls, pulled me on my side, and that same girl that ended up calling 911, she ended up lifting my shirt up and, applied pressure to my wounds. And that's when the pain really started to sink in, I knew it was bad. Breath, all the while still getting shorter and shorter. There was more blood. The people who were around that saw me, they all were very nervous. I just saw their faces, and, that made me a lot more nervous. The girl asked me if it was anybody that she could call. I told her reach in my pocket, look in my emergency contacts. She couldn't unlock my phone, and so I asked her to call my brother. I had enough breath to give her my brother's number. I told her his name. She reached out to him and called him right then on speaker, and unfortunately he didn't answer. And she asked if there was anybody else that she could call, and all I could murmur out at that time was emergency contacts. So she was finally able to unlock my phone and looked in my emergency contacts and was able to call my dad. And I remember laying on the ground and hearing her have the conversation with my dad, telling him that I had been shot. And that around that time, I remember my friends coming in that parking lot. One of my friends rushed over and saw me on the ground, and he just lost it. He couldn't believe what had happened. And the others squatted alongside me to support and kind of to let me know that they were there and encourage me to keep breathing, that I was strong. And moments later, the EMTs had arrived.
And did you want to speak to a little bit to your injuries?
I have a bullet literally lodged in my spine right now. I've got another gunshot to the leg, bullet wound to the leg, and I was actually shot twice in the back, about 3 inches away from the bullet that entered my spine. Another bullet entered through my back and basically bounced around inside of my body, ripping from my smaller intestines where it connects to my stomach. It ripped that area and then bounced down to my pancreas, my bladder, my kidney, as well as scratched through a piece of my lungs. And then it exited cleanly. Life is very, very different for me now. I went from being very active to, being a physical advocate, going to the gym and, working out and, doing all these things that, we so much take for granted, swimming and things like that. I'm not able to do anymore, as to where now, things as simple as walking is a task for me. Twisting and turning, bending are things that are hard for me to do now. So I'm just grateful to be alive.
Thank you. And yes, my name is Nicholas Giles. That's Nicholas. My last name is Giles, Giles. And I'm an attorney, but this case is a little more personal to me. This is actually my cousin. And so this has touched me in ways. We all see the gun violence that is going on in Houston. It's increasing, but when it hits your family and it's on your front door, it's painful. I spent last weekend visiting my cousin at his side, not knowing if he was even going to be alive or he would survive. I just want to take this, not just this case, but this incident as a call that the gun violence in Houston has to stop. It has to. It's not worth it. They're not worth it. So I call on and challenge all community leaders, the mayor, city council. We need to do something, and we need to do something now. And so thank you. That's all I have to say.
My name is Angelina White, Angelina. Last name Wike. So Levi spent approximately 2 weeks in the hospital. This happened on a Sunday evening, early 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. He was discharged from the hospital just yesterday. 2 weeks in the hospital. He required emergency surgery upon being admitted the evening of the incident. You heard him tell you he's got an injury to his pancreas, to his bladder, to his lung. He's actually got blood clotted in his lung. He suffered a lumbar fracture, so he's actually fractured his lower back. His small intestine, he had an injury to his small intestine where it meets the stomach. They had to repair that.
All right. If you all have any questions for the legal team or Levi.
Yeah, you said you took and investigated past incidents that kind of, in your mind, apparently contributed to this violence that takes place there. What did you discover during your investigation?
Yes, sir. So we're still in the process of gathering records from HPD and other agencies, but what we know is that there's a history of gunshots in the establishment, right outside the establishment, especially at closing time. So they close at around 2 a.m. and there's a tendency for people to crowd in the parking lot, and numerous times in the last 6 months that has led to gunshots being fired and fights, a lot of fights, but gun violence. And when we have that type of atmosphere, when you have alcohol being served and people who are armed, it's just a recipe for somebody getting hurt or killed, like what happened here.
So how do you think this lawsuit's going to help change or prevent that from happening again?
Sure. So we've got, obviously, we want the premises owners and the club owners to enforce stricter security controls. Have off-duty officers check for weapons being brought onto the premises, and also if there is an altercation that is going on between certain groups inside of the club or any type of establishment, then security and management need to step in. Okay, Levi was completely uninvolved in whatever was happening over there, and that's what the HPD investigation will ultimately prove, that he is an innocent bystander. What we have learned is that there was a group inside of the club that had some exchange of words earlier that night, and then that spilled into this random shooting in the parking lot. So our goal is to promote further security at these establishments and in these parking lots where it is known that the after hours people are hanging out and fights and shootings are happening.
So this would apply to not just the inside, but the outside of the parking lot too?
Yes, ma'am. So we have under Texas law, the premises owner, which is really the parking lot, and the building owner have certain obligations to the tenants and the people who visit these facilities, and it applies to the entire premises.
You mentioned, Mr. Aziz, that at this point, the only course of action for young people like your client who are being shot is to file a lawsuit because, and you said until the city or the state does something. You've been working in law in Houston for quite some time. Have you noticed that things have changed with how these troubled spots are being addressed by city leaders or the state?
Yes, ma'am. I do think that the city administration has been proactive with, drunk driving, with shooting and violence. But I think they need to be more proactive. And these type of incidents and bringing it to light, bringing it to public awareness that, a 26-year-old like Levi, who's was a college student, a student athlete, has zero criminal history. Young men and women should be able to go out without having the fear of getting gunned down in a parking lot, right? So we want the city to do more. Like in this case, they now have shut down the club, but given the recurrent criminal activity that was going on, it should have been shut down earlier.
We've heard that under other city administrations that there was like a no-nonsense policy, right? When someone wasn't licensed or they had a lot of issues, the city was out there locking up the club and not letting it get to this point. Is that something that you've seen over the course of your time working as a lawyer here? That it's changed now?
I mean, I do think, Mike, I do think that the city is being quite proactive. Okay, there's a lot of state resources that potentially could come into play as well, given this type of issue. But I do think the city is being proactive. I just feel like if there is an establishment that has a history of excessive overservice, fights, altercations, those type of establishments need to be shut down.
Mr. Harvey, have you been to Tabu before, or Parma when it was Parma months prior?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
Did you feel like sort of the chaotic environment that happened in the parking lot was also the vibe inside of the club?
Yes, I did. I was aware that there was an incident that happened inside, but it had kind of de-escalated before we ever exited the club that night.
Did they sell alcohol at that club?
Absolutely.
So, Micah, what Mr. Harvey has explained to me previously is that around 1 a.m. the club atmosphere was very packed. There was alcohol service, bottle service, which by its nature is somewhat unregulated because you don't have a bartender there counting people's consumption. like they're supposed to under the TABC, but there had been, as I've mentioned before, many instances of violence inside and outside the club, which should have been a big red flag.
So how do you, I'm still a little kind of confused here on the lingo. If you're going to be able to police, I guess, the kind of weapons that people bring into parking lots. I mean, if someone leaves a gun in the car, for example, like how do you sort of police and oversee that?
Sure. So, ma'am, here, one thing we know here is that this altercation between two groups started inside the club, right? At that point, HPD should have been called if there is an actual altercation that's brewing or some type of security. As far as policing what people bring inside the club, absolutely needs to be policed. But what people have in the parking lots, obviously people can lawfully have weapons in their cars. But if there is a security presence, or there are, for example, off-duty HPD security officers, we know that is a deterrent, because people know that there will be consequences immediately, right? So just like lights and gates and security cameras, off-duty police officers are a huge deterrent to crime. And for a group such as the Papa's group that is associated with this parking lot, it's really, when you look at the cost-benefit analysis, right? I mean, the cost of having that type of service is minimal compared to even, I'm sure, the rent they were making, but the overall cost to society, right? So we have a situation here where Mr. Harvey has spent 15 days in the hospital. And in this day and age, that's a significant amount of time in the hospital, right? People can have a spinal surgery and be out the same day. He has over $1 million in medical bills already. He is going to have weight restrictions as to how much he can lift and what he can do for the rest of his life. There's a bullet in his spine. So, I guess to answer your question, ma'am, if businesses would take basic security measures when they know there's a problem, right? I mean, we're not suggesting that every establishment in Houston needs to have off-duty HPD people, but if there is known security and criminal activity, then that needs to be addressed.
Do you know if they had a off-duty HPD in a parking lot or anything?
No, sir. There was no off-duty security, no off-duty HPD in the parking lot. There was some security inside of the club, but as the night progressed and things started to escalate, there was no intervention by the management or any security.
I think it's your reaction. HPD just released surveillance video from the incident from alleged suspects, the shooting from that night. Any comment on that?
So I have not been able to review. I haven't reviewed that yet.
Now the security, people who were providing security within the club, were they just bouncers? Were they actually had some sort of certification as a security officer, like with their license? Can you describe what was the level of security? What was the level of training and such that the security personnel had in the club?
Yes, sir. So we know that when they would walk into the club, their IDs were checked, and sometimes they would check the bags of some of the visitors. I don't know any specific training of any of the guards, security people, other than that they were bouncer types. They would check your ID, let you into the club. And again, people who are trained in security are trained to intervene before a situation escalates and spills over into a shooting. None of that happened that night.
the personnel who were present, were they just like kind of, I mean, do you know exactly what happened? Were they kind of just hands off, like unless somebody starts punching each other, we're not intervening? Do you have more of a feel of that?
Well, I don't, sir. All I know is that there was a situation where two groups were getting into some type of altercation, and then nobody intervened inside of the club. And apparently there was a group outside, and when everybody was leaving at 2 a.m., that's when the shooting started.
Have you handled cases like these before? Does it seem like there's a recurring problem in Houston of kind of unregulated clubs where violence happens?
Yes, sir. So I've handled many cases like this before, not only in Houston but all over the country, including the MGM shooting, which was a different event, of course. But shooting cases come down to some basic reasons. It always typically starts with excessive alcohol service, lack of security, lack of management intervention, and then somebody pulls out a gun. So we do know that there has been a lot of shooting incidents. All you have to do is look at the news on Monday morning or Sunday morning, and all you would hear is either drunk drivers killing people or criminals shooting and killing people in the public, right? I mean, that's just every Sunday morning. So like my co-counsel here said, something has to change, right? And the HPD is investigating. HPD has interviewed my client a number of times, and we hope that they catch a suspect. But as far as we know, there has been no arrest in the case so far.
Mr. Harvey, do you regret going to Tabu that night?
100%. If I could relive that day and never have went, my life, might have still been the same. But unfortunately, no, that's not the case.
Do you know any of the other people that were shot, or?
I do not know. I'm not aware of anybody else that was shot. Like I said, I was literally just leaving, looking for my friends, and unfortunately, I was hit.
You have an opportunity, obviously, with this news conference to speak to the people of Houston.
Mm-hmm.
You've had a horrible experience, and it's obviously you have lifelong consequences of it. What would be your message to the uninvolved, unconnected to this tragedy? What would you tell them today, the people watching this?
I would tell them that it really doesn't make sense for us not to be able to, go out and have a good time and, maybe even have a couple of drinks and, feel like we're not safe. It's not okay for us to just be out and be hit by gunfire that has absolutely nothing to do with us. I would encourage everyone who's on the opposite side end of this thing that it's really not worth it. There's no other way to put it. You're literally ruining people's lives. My life, like I said, will literally never be the same. I can't stress that enough. I love being active. I love to run. So many things that I took for granted before, that I'll never get to again, So, I just encourage, people to stop, please be aware of your surroundings. It takes a second. The time that you believe that it won't be you, and I did feel like that for the longest, guys, it could be you, just that quick, so that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.